Welcome, everybody. That worked. Welcome, everybody, to the December 2019 UGA meeting. Looks like we got a great turnout for Tom's talk today. I'd like to start with asking new members to stand up, introduce themselves, and say who they are. So, new members, I'm seeing lots of new faces. I'm seeing lots of old faces I haven't seen in a while. You want to start at the back and work our way forward?
My name is Melanie Wilkerson. I work in the Abandoned Mine Reclamation Program in the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. And I'm really happy to be a member of the UGA. I'm Maria Slack. I work for Petroleum Systems International, and I figured it was long since time that I joined, so here I am.
Any other new members? I would like to recognize Paul Gedge over here, who is making this go live on YouTube. This is a great thing that we've added to this in the last couple of years. My next message to you is I have been approached, and the last count was 6 different people that have warned me about changes to AAPG and the ramification it has to us, because we were getting a lot of profit sharing money from them, from their conferences. So unfortunately, we're going to tighten our belts a little bit this year. I mean, wasn't my plan to do, but we want to make sure that UGA lives on for a long time. So everyone that approached me, I want to thank them for approaching me and to warn us about the possible shortfall in 10 years if we don't do anything at this time. So we might not have quite as many field trips. We did really good last year with like 11 or 12 field trip scholarships, but we want to make this last on for a long time. I'm sure this year will be fine, but we're going to start tightening our belts this year. Next thing I have is guidebook number 49, Earth's Renewable Energy and Mineral Resources, Moving Towards the Future. Jan Morris is our chief editor, and she would like to thank everybody for submitting abstract, and also note that it's not too long, not too early to start submitting your papers. You can submit them before the end of 2019. We're ready to start taking them and reviewing them. Next thing I have on the list is Teacher of the Year nominations are due by December 31st. This is so that we can put them forward, because we want to put them to the Rocky Mountain section and then have them go on to the national section of AEG if Rocky Mountain section wants to put them forward. There is a change this year. You can go directly, though, to AAPG if they want to national level. UGA board's going to start working on the field camp scholarship programs in January to get that going. And then I just want to say, since I've been involved with the board, I've seen a lot of really good things. The data pages have been new. It brings in money. Paul has worked really hard on the website, and the YouTube broadcasts that Paul Gedge has been bringing have all been really positive changes that we've made. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul to introduce our speaker today.
We're happy to have Mr. Tom Chidsey here for the December luncheon. He so graciously volunteered for our speakership. He is, if you don't know Tom, he is actually the UGA's delegate for the AAPG. We're a partner organization with them, and so he's going to go over some AAPG stuff as well during his presentation. Tom grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I spent some time up there. And received his BS in 1974 and his MS in 1977, both from BYU. During his 43-year career, Tom worked as a production geologist for Exxon in South Texas and an exploration geologist in the Thrust Belt, Uinta Basin, Bridger Basin for Celsius Wexpro, now Dominion Energy, before joining the UGS. We're glad to have him. In 1989. Tom served as a APG Rocky Mountain Section President, UGA President, and General Chair of the 2003 APG Annual Convention and Exhibition here in Salt Lake City. Is a board member of the APG RMS Foundation, and as I mentioned earlier, one of our delegates. He has a wide interest in geology, numerous publications in the petroleum geology field. Aren't you the recent recipient of the publication award, the Crawford Award, right? Yeah, are one of the most recent recipients of the prestigious UGS Crawford Award for publication quality, among many other things. He has interest in numerous publications in petroleum geology, carbon dioxide, resources and sequestration, oil and gas reservoir, outcrop analogs, microbial carbonates, and the general geology of Utah's parks. And most recently, co-authored papers on Mars rover protocols using Utah sites. He's been an editor and co-editor of 9 UGA APG and UGS guidebooks and bulletins on Utah geology. Tom's other interests include art, history, travel, John Wesley Powell's 1869 journey down the Grand Canyon, which was highlighted in the recent UGS, what was that? Survey notes. And World War I and Civil War. So please help me welcome Tom Chitsey.
Thanks. I didn't think there'd be anybody here because it was December, and I was kind of like number 4 or 5 on his list, and everybody else turned him down. So, but I was available. So, and thank you, Paul, here for doing this YouTube thing and not connecting with the impeachment hearings. You know, I think hopefully this will be a little more interesting than that. As for those of you who don't know, again, UGA is an affiliated society of APG. So I have to, and I'm the delegate, as Paul mentioned, UGA's lone delegate for APG. And as such, I have to do a shameless plug for APG before I start as my delegate duty. Just by a show of hands, who here is not an APG member? Whoa, okay. The rest of you can keep eating, and the non-members can. How many of you are students? Are there any students here? Okay, you could listen as well. Let's see if this is not moving. Okay, it's not. Where do I aim?
Mm-hmm. That's right now.
There we go. Okay, so again, the shameless plug. APG was founded 102 years ago or so, and it is the premier oil and gas geologic association in the world. We have about 30,000 members worldwide, representing or members from over 100, almost 125 countries. And members not only are geologists, but they can be other things as well, geophysicists and big bosses, CEOs and consultants, and managers, everybody else. We have a lot of university professors are APG members, and of course, students. So that's why the students need to pay attention. What does APG offer and provide? Well, publications, both digital and some in hard copy still. The APG Bulletin is put out every month. There are numerous special studies that APG publishes on specific topics. We were involved a number of years ago, Paul Anderson right here, and our group published a whole book just on the Farron Sandstone of Utah on one of these things. They offer educational opportunities, short courses and field trips and things like that, for the members as well. And then they provide all this information digitally throughout into the public. So it does a lot of different things. And there at the bottom is their big line, community and sustainability are key elements that help APG unlock member aid and industry opportunities. I mentioned, okay, becoming it is easy. For those of you that raised your hand, they've made a bunch of changes, and one of them I'll get to in a second, but they've made a 3-tier due process. So if you make over $50,000 a year, you have to pay $125. Or if you're really old like me and have been a member for 40 years, then you have half price because you become emeritus. But most of the people aren't my age in this group, so.
Pay you less, I can give you a discount.
You can be okay. That's fine. There's always a couple of what we call TMs when I give talks. TMs, you know what a TM is? That's a troublemaker. So we have a troublemaker here. So we have TM. Under $50,000, you can get 50% off, and then those $25,000 left, it's 75% discount. If you're a student, for those students that are interested, Chevron covers your dues 100%. Like a lot of them, I've done a lot of things, and Bill as well, where we've done a lot of things with students. And I always recommend to students that to really, a fairly easy way to beef up your resume trying to get a job or go to graduate school is to join some organizations like UGA for a local one, which is, what is a dues for a UGA student? It's not $10, something like that a year, $5. It's very cheap, $5. And then APG, it doesn't even cost anything while you're a student, but it looks really good on your resume. So to add that kind of thing. So I would highly recommend you consider that. One of the changes that I discussed back in October when I gave the delegates report was that new to APG is there's no longer a sponsorship required. So if those people that don't want to join APG, you don't have to go out and find somebody and bribe them to be a sponsor for you. You can just join, and it's that easy. Just go online and join. You don't have to get that other sponsorship. So, any questions about it? APG is a great organization that I've been a member for 45 years, and I would highly recommend you consider joining APG. Any questions about APG? Okay, you're all sold. All right. Now, how do we get to my talk? Let's see. Yeah, you want to get me to my talk? I was told not to go. Let's see, maybe this is going to work. I'm dumb. I'm a mouse person. There you go.
Give me 1 second to make sure.
We're good. Okay, thank you. Okay, this is why everybody really came, not to hear about AAPG, I hope. And what I'm going to do is talk about Covenant Field and what we've learned. And I'm going to say the word we a lot because a whole lot of people, many of you are in this room, have been involved in learning a lot about this big oil field. For those who don't know about it, Covenant was discovered 15 years ago last month in the central Utah Thrust Belt, not too far from Richfield. And it was the biggest field. It's become the biggest oil field in Utah since the discovery in 1979 of Anschutz Ranch East Field in the northern Utah Thrust Belt, right on the border with Wyoming and Utah. Part of it actually goes into Wyoming, about 40 miles from here. And that field's produced about 130 million barrels of oil, Anschutz Ranch East. So along comes Covenant in 2004 and discovered, and it has turned out to be everything that it was hoped for. It's a major, huge discovery in the central Utah Thrust Belt. And Peter's talking, he's got a sign up, talk louder. I tell this story often because I tend not to talk loud enough. I was giving a talk years ago, and I lose my voice. I was giving a talk years ago at APG, and a guy in the audience yelled out what sounded to me like liar. And that was a time that a congressman during President Obama's State of the Union address yelled out liar. And I thought this guy was saying the same thing to me, but he was really saying louder. So I'm sorry, I'll try not to lie as well as talk louder. So where was I? So we had this discovery that was made in the central Utah Thrust Belt after many, many years of searching. And so a lot has been learned about this field since it was discovered. And what I'm really doing is giving you a compilation of what has been learned by a lot of people since it was discovered. And I attempted here to list them all as acknowledgments, but I'm probably listed a lot of people that did work here on this field that are not on this list, and I apologize, it was not intentionally. I kind of ran out of room and all that, but a lot of people have done great work on Covenant Field, and have presented their work at various meetings. But what I thought I would do is take all the little bits and pieces of their work and put it all together into one presentation, and that's what I'm attempting to do. I like to say that I know good work when I steal it, and that's what I'm going to try to present today. So for the outline, we're going to talk a little bit again about the background of the field, when it was discovered, a little bit about the reservoir data. I'd say Jurassic, quote, Navajo, and I'll explain that in a little bit later. The production and reserves. Then we're going to go into what we've learned about the stratigraphy and the facies, and then some of the structural interpretation, migration history, oil source, and so forth. So that's kind of the outline of the talk, and then what is the future potential in this particular area of central Utah. For those of you who don't know, then Covenant is located not too far from Richfield. There's one little field that was discovered to the north in 2008 called Providence Field, and the rest of it. But this is our general play area in yellow. And when you see we've got all the thrust faults, or a lot of the thrust faults that are labeled there that go through this particular area. The San Rafael Swell is off to the east, about 40 miles away. Okay, so the exploration history of central Utah goes way back, clear back into 1918. They actually started drilling wells, and they drilled about 120 wells before the discovery of Covenant Field in the central Utah thrust belt. None of those found anything. Each decade saw an increase in drilling, particularly after the 1975 discovery of Pineview oil field, again very close to Colville, east of here, which kind of set off all the thrust belt activity and fields that are found in northern Utah thrust belt as well as southwestern Wyoming. And so the idea was we probably have similar types of fields in the central Utah thrust belt. The structures are very similar and so forth. And so after, in the 1970s and early 1980s, as you can see, the drilling really spiked. After the discovery of Covenant, the dominant drilling has been taking place by Wolverine, the company that made the initial discovery. Now, one of the big operators or companies that drilled in the 1980s was Placid Oil Company. And Placid Oil drilled about 15 wells in central Utah. Now, you see the picture there of you're looking at the canyon range off in the distance, and there's the rig there of the Placid well, and there's a gentleman there in that picture. Anybody want to take a guess who that is? Grant, you can't do it. Anybody want to guess? Nobody? Doug Sprinkle, raise your hand. That hasn't changed a bit. That's Doug 40 years ago. I kind of call him Scary Doug, you know, and Doug is one of the people who have done a huge amount of work here. And Doug liked to say from his Placid days, I quote Doug, he says, all the wells they drilled didn't find anything, so he was involved with helping people to figure out where not to drill. Right? So, and I have another picture of Doug. Again, I'm picking on Doug because he's retiring at the end of this month after 33 years here at the UGS. So let's give Doug a hand for that. So this is Doug. I'm picking on him a little bit, but there's a little known fact about Doug that nobody knows about. Doug was a movie star. He appeared in Napoleon Dynamite as Uncle Rico. So anyway, I got permission to do this before I did this. Anyway, okay, back. So meanwhile, back on task here. So the discovery was the Kings Ranch Meadow 17-1. It was drilled about a little over 9,000 feet. Again, as I discovered, it was like last month, 15 years ago, and it had an initial flowing potential of over 700 barrels of oil and a little bit of water, no gas, and we'll get to the no gas in a little bit later. And so here was this, it was drilled on a spot that was included both private lands, the ranch, federal lands, BLM lands, and as well as some state school trust lands. So there was a huge amount of interest once this well was discovered. And Wolverine wanted to keep it confidential. This was a picture taken in the spring of 2005, not too long after the field was initially discovered, and you can see all the drilling operations that are going on there. Wolverine wanted to keep everything confidential, the amount of oil that was being produced and so forth. But look at what's right there in front of all that rig stuff. That's Highway 24. that leads to Loa and Capitol Reef and so forth. And so this discovery was probably the worst kept secret around. They were counting the number of tanker trucks that were leaving the location carrying 800 barrels of oil and so forth. And so the local people and the news media and so forth all had a really good idea of how much that this was indeed a major discovery. Now, this is what Sevier Valley looks like. And a lot of people got all excited about this naturally, that this was this big new discovery. Leasing took off. All the farmers were getting big bonuses for their leases to drill on their lands. There was seismic being shot all over the place. Drilling increased by Wolverine and others. And a lot of people thought that, well, I was getting lots of calls. I had to make presentations down to the county commissioners in Richfield and in Sanpete County, explaining about this new discovery. People were calling me up. I had a little old lady that actually called me up and said, a helicopter flew over her house. Doesn't that mean that there's oil under my land? And I said, no. And she argued with me. I'm not making this up. She said, well, they said it did. And so on these presentations I made, I kind of advised people, and we don't know that much yet about down here. So don't go buying a boat or a new pickup truck just yet, because the field is only, being initially developed as about 1,000 acres total. But people thought, well, it might end up looking like this. And the news media, there were things about it in the newspaper, and not only county commissioners, but and so forth like that. But other people all wanted to know about what this new big discovery was and whether there were going to be more. And it even made the front cover of our AAPG monthly news magazine, The Explorer. And this picture was taken in April of 2005 of the drilling operations. That's looking back towards the Brevant Range. So everybody was excited about this new discovery. And it really kind of turned out to be everything that it was hoped for. And this is just a little bit about the field itself, where we are right now, in terms of covers about 1,600 acres. The net pay was great, over 400 feet, 12% porosity, permeability is wonderful, up to 100 millidarcies, and only 38% water saturation initial. Has a really strong water drive. And I say again, I'm putting it in quotes, the reservoir rock was the lower Jurassic Navajo sandstone, very sand rich, very clean, good sand, and so forth. This is what it looks like. This is just a chunk of the core, a classic example of Aeolian sandstone, and you can see for the thin section there with all the blue, that's the porosity. We see a little bit of it's kind of bimodal in this particular thin section with some fine grain, but larger sand grains and so forth. And this is just I'm going to show this a couple of times, that this is a section of the core. And when it was initially discovered, it was reported by us and other people that it had both an upper and a lower Navajo section separated by an interdunal mud-rich section that you see here. And both the upper and lower were productive of this, and we called this interdunal stuff, or kind of a playa-type deposit. And that was the initial interpretation. You didn't have to go very far to look at the outcrops, about 40 miles to the east there in the San Rafael Swell, where the Navajo is so well exposed. And as a matter of fact, I'm hoping next year to actually publish some work that we did where we compared the outcrops here this was with Tom Morris and some of his students and some other people as well, to compare the Navajo and outcrop to Covenant and other areas. Again, classic examples of the Aeolian dune facies that you see in there and that we see in the core as well. And then the interdune areas where represent either high water tables or oasis and things like that. So very well exposed. Even in the Jurassic, the wind was coming out of Wyoming, so it's always windy in Wyoming heading south. And so this is our standard Blakey Rainey map of the Jurassic, early Jurassic. And our modern analogs being the Sahara Desert, as well as we don't have to go very far in Utah to see Little Sahara and similar types of Aeolian features. The other thing that I like to always show are pictures of the Gobi, where in the Gobi there's a high water table. And as a result, in between these large, huge, massive dunes, you have ponds. And we saw the same thing in the Navajo at that time. Okay, as I mentioned, it's everything that we hope for. This is a production graph through last year. And you can see the initial production starting in 2004. I know you can't read the numbers, but it peaked in 2009, if I'm reading that right. And then the oil started declining, production started declining as water production increased, a natural occurrence. But if you note there, right at starting in 2007 and into 2018, the water production started to go down a little bit, and the oil production came up, and that's because Wolverine drilled some additional wells within the field. A little bit about the production data. There are currently 34 producing wells in the field, 2 dry holes only since it was drilled, and it's produced about 27 million barrels in those 15 years. No gas, and now almost 43 million barrels of water. And the daily production is still 3,400 barrels a day, which is really amazing. The reserve estimates by Wolverine was about 100 million barrels in place, and so they produced almost 30% of that at this point, and they're estimating anywhere between around 40% or so ultimate recovery. So we've had some disappointing results. This map, if you maybe in the back, you can maybe see the red dots. Those red dots represent wells that have been drilled in the play area since the field, since Covenant was discovered. All of them, with the exception of the little small Providence oil field, were dry. And we don't know, the structure targets may be different. We got this real complex section of European, Jurassic European, with all the salts and anhydrites above it that make the seismic picture difficult to determine at times. Sometimes the reservoir quality isn't too good. I actually own part of a lease that I almost got fired for. I asked Doug about this, about 20 miles from Covenant, and they drilled a well 3 miles from there, Wolverine did, and everything was right except it had 0 porosity. So I still am here. I didn't have to get rich. Maybe we don't quite understand that the timing of migration is being worked out. But sometimes that'll happen after the structure's been made and so forth. And maybe we still don't understand the petroleum system completely.
How much did Providence make?
Providence has made around 600,000 barrels, something like that, out of one well. It's just one well. So, okay, what have we learned in 15 years? The major thing that we've learned in 15 years is I have not aged very gracefully. So that's one thing. But we've learned a lot about the stratigraphy and the facies. And this is the original interpretation of the well early on after the discovery. And you can see, as I mentioned earlier, we've got trust me, we have this lower Navajo, and right in here we had that brown, that dark muddy interval, and then we had what we call the upper Navajo with Twin Creek above it. However, work by Doug and Helmut Doling and others have determined that that's really not right. First of all, Wolverine and others, and Jerry Wanders and so forth, discovered marine polymorphs in quote, the upper Navajo, or in the Navajo. And that's not right, because we believe that's all Aeolian. So we got these marine fossils in there. The other thing that was discovered, both above and slightly above and below that mudstone interval of the interdunal, quote, interdunal stuff, was glauconite, which is a marine mineral. Other work that was done by Doug and his colleagues looked at the stratigraphy and the correlations. And they determined that really, in reality, with this other information, so here's our Covenant well, one of the wells, and our glauconite right here, marine incursion right there. But this is actually the Middle Jurassic Temple Cap Formation that we're seeing. And that the upper Navajo is what's called the White Throne member. The middle interval is actually the Sinawava member of the Temple Cap Formation, sitting unconformably above the Navajo. Okay, and if you look at the Navajo, or the Navajo Temple Cap sequence that you see at the east entrance of Zion National Park, it's easy to see what we've just described. We have the Navajo sandstone, and that unit that's right there at the top with the all the trees on it right there, the 2/3 of the way up, that's the Sinawava member. That's the mud-rich member that causes all the staining that you see in the Navajo. And then the White Throne member above it. And then the top is the Epsom Point member of the Temple Cap Formation, all separated by the the J1 unconformity, a time gap of 10 million years. And that's what we think we see now in these cores. So let's go back to that core again that we showed. So now the mudstone would be the Sinawava member of the Temple Cap Formation. And then we have a little bit of that sandstone underneath it that's still in there. There's glauconite in there. And then somewhere in there is the J1 unconformity and then the Navajo. So that's the newer interpretation. Again, here's the new interpretation. We have, instead of Twin Creek, we have Arapian at the top, sitting on top of the Temple Cap Formation. The middle unit being the Sinawava member, bounded by glauconite, the J1 unconformity, and then the Navajo sandstone. And here are the two interpretations side by side, with our current interpretation to the right. If we look at the Temple Cap Formation itself, it's very similar to the Navajo. However, and this is the White Throne member, which is the reservoir unit of this Temple Cap Formation. And you can see the cross bedding. It's Aeolian, just like similar to the Navajo, has less feldspar than the Navajo. There's the Sinawava member, that mud-rich unit. Back to a Blakey map. So we're looking at Middle Jurassic time. The wind direction was more to the southwest, based on work that other people have done. And then there's Covenant. So we think that this is really more like our modern example of the coastal dunes that we see along the coast of Namibia and South Africa. And then the Sinawava is similar to also along these the coast of Namibia, where we see tidal channels, tidal flats, and that kind of environments. Let's look at the structural interpretation. And so this was the initial interpretation that was that Wolverine had done, and you can see it's very similar to probably to what we have in the northern Utah thrust belt, where the structure is created by a rollover anticline or splay off of a major thrust, creating an anticline in our trapping mechanism. Then when Wolverine drilled a well off to the flank to get rid of the produced water, it turned out to be different than they thought. If I back up, you can see that they would have expected if they drilled off to the west from the discovery well, you would have seen a repeated Navajo section. In reality, they only saw what was called the lower Navajo. They did not see a repeated Navajo section. And therefore, the interpretation was that there was a West Virgin back thrust, if you will, that set up the structure. So it took a water producing a disposal well to come up with the current interpretation of the structure. Now, mapping of it's been done by Doug and others, Grant and others at the UGS for years, Helmut Doling, has shown that back thrusts are very common throughout this part of the central Utah thrust belt. This is a little bit to the north. Providence oil fields there at the southern end of the White Hills. And you can see a back thrust right through there with overturned, it's Helmut Doling standing there. And you can see overturned Green River Formation and Colton with the Jurassic Arapian being shoved on it along a back thrust. It goes essentially most of the anticlinorium of the Sevier Valley, Sanpete Valley area. Okay, this is just a structural map on top of the White Throne member of the Temple Cap Formation. Again, you can see the back thrust, and the overall structure is slightly trending in a southwesterly direction. Okay, hydrocarbon source and migration history. Early on, most of the exploration was hoping to find very similar types of source rock as in the northern part of Utah thrust belt and southwestern Wyoming, where the source rocks are subthrust Cretaceous marine rocks. However, they're really not present here in central Utah, and that was things that were throwing a lot of interpretations off. We weren't finding the source rocks. We now believe that the source rocks for Covenant Field, and Dave Waverick and others have done a lot of work on this, so he can correct everything I say, but we think that it was probably either a Mississippian Pennsylvanian age Manning Canyon shale or something similar to that stratigraphically, or perhaps the Del phosphatic member of the Mississippian Deseret limestone. which are seen in outcrop here. These are organic rich units, and we think that these are actually the source rock, not the Cretaceous source subthrust rocks that we have to the north, because they're not present in the subthrust. We are involved with biomarker analysis of this, and I am by no means any kind of expert at any of this. Doug did a lot of work comparing the biomarkers from a lot of oils throughout the Intermountain West, and you can see where those oils were collected and sampled in the fields, and there where Covenant is. And if you look at the saturated versus aromatic components, Wolverine or the Covenant oil is kind of sitting there by itself. It's in the marine window, if you will, but it's not like a lot of those others that were sampled. It's definitely not tertiary or Cretaceous. And again, here it is. If we're looking at pristine phytene ratios, again, it kind of away from some of the other units in there. So it's definitely an oddball thing. We don't think but it's not Cretaceous. Let's go back to our original, our newer interpretation, and you can see where would that source rocks be. It's most likely coming from either some of these organic rich units within the thrust plates that set up this structure, or in the subthrust part below it, but still in Paleozoic rocks. I show this because one of the mysteries to me from the beginning was, well, where did the gas go? Why was there no gas present in the field? And if we look at the interpretation, the early interpretation that you see on the left, perhaps that's what it may have looked at like at one time. In other words, it didn't have the back thrust. It was a paleo trap, if you will. And then when the back thrust formed, so that the initial structure probably formed around 110 million years ago, and perhaps the back thrust formed between 80 and 90 million years ago. In the process of that, it reconfigured the trap, and the gas leaked off into either the surface as seeps or into some other units waiting to be discovered. Future potential. I always throw the crystal ball up there because who knows what's really going to happen. This is, again, our map that shows where the play area is and all the wells that have been drilled in it, both since Covenant was discovered and prior. And it's been divided by Doug and others into three areas, the western, central, and eastern areas. And so I know you can't read any of this really, but we have blue stars that represent reservoir rocks, green circles for source rocks, and yellow for seals. And you can just see through the whole section there that there's lots of various potential reservoir rocks besides the Navajo and Temple Cap that are there, as well as various source rocks. And again, so in terms of structures, we'd be looking at possible targets or blind thrust structures in the Paleozoic that are Paleozoic cored, either more imbricants or kind of thrust duplexes. Back thrust may create things. Extensional faults may have created some traps, as well as even subthrust structures. In terms of potential reservoirs, we've again talked a lot about the Navajo sandstone and now the Temple Cap being present. Mississippian could be possibly a reservoir target, particularly the Deseret and so forth. And then Permian rocks, the Kaibab have actually produced a little bit of oil just to the east in the San Rafael Swell near Farron, as well as, of course, Upper Valley in the Kaparowitz Basin. So we know it's been a reservoir rock in other places. The Sinbad limestone, it produces a grassy trail field on the east side of the San Rafael Swell. It could be a target, as well as some key members of the European Formation. And then we talked about source rocks, again, the Mississippian Dell, the Manning Canyon, Donut, and maybe even the Park City Formation may all be potential source rocks for the area, as well as some unknown ones. Okay, this is where I wake everybody up. Okay. Has anybody heard of the rock group Steam? Nobody. Okay. They had one hit 50 years ago. And nobody want to take a guess at that? Nobody wants to get. I'm going to put Bill on the spot.
Some like it hot.
No. No. Okay, they had one hit. I'm gonna make a connection with this field in a minute. Okay, but it goes. All right, Bill.
Okay.
What song do people sing even to this day, 50 years after the hit? I was a senior in high school when this song came out. This one-hit wonder. What song? You like basketball, right? Yeah, you like basketball. No? What do people sing when somebody fouls out of a game? Who sing? That's there. Who said that? I heard it the other day. That song. How many have ever sang that song at a basketball game or heard it sung? Oh. No, it was not Queen. This is way before Queen. So here, 50 years later, this one-hit song is still sung by people that have no idea, weren't even born when it was. And the reason I say that is right now, Covenant Field is basically a one-hit wonder. There's our connection. I get to it eventually. So what do we need to do to keep Covenant from being a one-hit wonder? Well, first of all, we need some better oil prices because it's a pretty high-risk area. So people willing to take that risk in the Central Utah Thrust is going to take continued good science and a lot of luck. And so I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and thank you for coming at this Christmas time. So I have a Christmas gift for everybody. We call this the stuff that dreams are made of. It's some oil from Covenant Field. So you can all have a little bit of Covenant oil.
Tom, did biomarker analysis of Providence have the same as Covenant?
It's a little different. Well, the question that Riley had was about Providence, the oil in Providence. Providence has some, and Dave can probably address this better than me, but Providence has both. First of all, it has the upper Navajo. Now, I'm not talking that temple. There's no temple cap production there, but there is a repeated Navajo section like there is at Covenant, and both upper part and the lower, the repeated Navajo are both productive, or were initially, and that they have gas associated with them. There is gas production. Some of the gas is CO2, and there was some nitrogen and so forth as well as some methane. And some of the ideas that some of that came possibly result of the Marysville volcanic field. I don't know, Dave, jump in anytime on the Providence oil biomarkers the question is about the Providence oil.
Invite me to come out and
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, anyway, that's what I understand anyways. Okay. No, speakers.
I think he just volunteered.
Okay. He can correct everything I've said, so. Any other questions for anybody? Questions? Grant.
So your migration path, what do you think? North, south, east, or west?
I don't know. You know, that would be a fantastic study to do. And I don't know. I don't know what the migration. My guess is coming from the west or along the thrust plains. That's what it's migrating through, along thrust plains and so forth. But well, if it's coming from within the section itself, possibly not. Paul.
Do you think it's traps, the type of traps or the setup of the traps that's really deciding whether or not you're going to find oil in that location?
Well, yeah. I mean, you got to have all those 5 things.
Because there's a lot of thrusting going on there, but
Right.
it seems like there's a specific type of thrusting required.
Well, again, you have to keep in mind I always like to say there's 5 things you need to have the oil there. You have to have a source. The migration history has to be correct. You have to have a good reservoir rock. You have to have the trap. You have to have a seal. And you have to have all 5 of those things. And so that's why something's not quite understood or wasn't initially. As I understand from Wolverine, they drilled a lot of these wells initially and then wanted to step back and do an evaluation to see where they would go next, to have a better understanding of the petroleum system. They're still interested in out there. There's still, obviously there's potential. They drilled some more wells, as I mentioned, within the field. Last year they drilled, I think, 3 wells to further define the limits of the field, but they haven't drilled anything in a while to find additional traps. So, anyway. Yeah, Tom. You'd have to, I don't believe this. I know they went to hearing, and where's Ammon? Somebody from Oil, Gas, and Mining. I think they did go to hearing and had to get some sort of permits to drill these additional wells in the southern end of the field, from what I understand. They were a little step, as I understood it, they were step out. I did invite them to be authors of, this paper was actually presented at APG in San Antonio, and I did invite them, but they're busy trying to come up with new things that they kind of want to keep confidential. And so, before you cut me off, for those who would like to, we do have the core pulled that I've shown here, and if you have time and would like to look at the core from Covenant Field, we have that out in our core layout area, and I'd be happy to, and Doug as well would be happy to go out there and kind of walk it through. It's kind of got some stuff, signs on it and things like that. There's handouts as well about the field and some of these ideas that have been presented. So it can be a little chilly back here, you might, if you want to, but we're happy to have you actually look at the Covenant core before you go. Okay.
Let's give Tom Chitsey another round of applause. Thanks to the UGS and the Core Center for hosting us. And please do check out that core, but it's pretty cool. I'm definitely going to look at it.
Tell them about the next one.
Oh, the next speakers. Do you remember the name of their group?
No.
I don't either. They're going to be talking about running the Colorado River and some of the pictures they've taken over time during their expeditions along the Colorado. So highly recommend it. You come for January's lecture. Yeah, back in the same place. Restoring rapids. Yeah, restoring rapids. Thanks.